Good evening. My name is Jim Crawford. I live at 201 56th Street, Downers Grove, but I'm actually here tonight as a representative from St. Mary's the Gostin, like I was about 3 weeks ago. St. Mary's has joined a group, an informal group, Mr. Newstad, you understand this, of about a dozen churches. And these churches are trying to figure out how to organize themselves to continue to communicate their disappointment in the storm utility fee. At this present time, they've actually developed a set of talking points, and for the next several council meetings, different churches will start appearing at the city council meetings and expressing their views and their points of views, and St. Mary's happens to be first on the list, and that's why I'm here today. So I have several points. I'll go through them quickly. I'm sure you've thought of most of them and know what to say or know what to do with them anyway, but I thought I'd start. The first one, and obviously it's the core of the issue, the separation of church and state. We do understand that the separation of the utility, and by creating that function, it is no longer a tax, but in reality, it is a government service, a service that was delivered by the community, by the city, and it was funded by taxes. You move that out of that element to continue to grow it and to do the equality argument, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But in essence, to many of the people and many of the pastors of these different churches, to them it's a clear issue of the heart of our Constitution, which is taxation of churches are separated in this country, and by applying this function as a fee versus a tax, they believe that's a dangerous precedent. The second thing that they're kind of worried about is that the amount of money. Now, I know that after talking to a couple of people on the council, there really is no specific idea of 15 years, 10% increase per year, although some of those numbers have been kicked around in the past, maybe at a hearing or two, and then that actually, Rule 72, right, you divide the interest rate into 72, tells you how many times you double. That's a 2.5 times increase in the amount of money you're going to run. Some people crunching that number thinks that becomes almost equal to the total amount of budget that is currently being run by Downers Grove, and that scares them. But in essence is, you have created utility. And by creating that utility, you now own the utility. And then the question becomes then, not necessarily worried about this council, but councils of the future, what's our safeguards to make sure that that utility does not pass on excessive increases, 15 years, 10% a year, like it's been kicked around, to meet the needs of the future, whether appropriate or not. The safeguards don't list, right? There's no public utility to commission to hold those increases into place. There's no free market services of competition to hold those prices down. And I think we all remember what Rahm Emanuel did to us with the water rates, right? No recourse, had to take them, 80-90% increase across the board for all the suburbs, and we had to roll back it. No utility commission to hold accountability for the price increase. It raised grave concerns. The third issue is really the financial burden. The financial burden that's placed upon these parishes, these worship communities. These communities provide great services, as many of you know, because you participate in them in so many of your own churches. They feed the people who can't feed themselves. They shelter people who can't shelter themselves, whether it's the PADS organization that we're recognized, whether it's housing accountability and programs that allow people, the homeless, to find homes, whether it's counseling. When you put a financial burden, which I know you realize, but when you put that financial burden on the church or on any of the worship centers, that money's got to come from somewhere. They have to cut something. Plant and equipment is fixed, as many of you know from your own businesses. So that means then services have to be cut. Those services are going to fall upon those most needy in our community. And yet the idea was to try to create the utility to put the burden equally across. But by imposing that duty on the churches, in essence, you're beginning to harm those who can't necessarily take care of themselves, because the churches don't have the ability to go out and increase their revenues. They can certainly ask for more money, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the fact of the matter is their revenue streams are fixed towards contributions that come to them. The ability to pass on those increases are severely limited. And that kind of raises an issue then on fairness. If you place a burden on a church that is then providing services to the community, but then exempt the park district, which is a large government entity. Remember the idea of the utility, to share the burden of expense across all entities, residential, commercial, and government entities. I admire the fact that you put yourselves in that exact same boat. You're assessing that fee on the government of Downers Grove, but then you exempt the park district. Now, I think I kind of understand why we understand in this essence that the park district spends millions and millions of dollars every year in retention ponds, right? Part of the overall plan for the storm water runoff. But you know, in essence, the Park District has a duty. That duty is to serve. That service is to build gathering places for our community. Fishing, boating, the ability to create paths and areas around large bodies of water are those tools that allow us to build those places. The actual duty is the gathering places. The benefit, the service, is actually helping manage the water runoff. But to sit there and say that that service, that value to the community, carries more weight to justifying an exemption versus the churches, the worship centers, where people are feeding people, where people are sheltering people, where people are taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, that service into the same community doesn't carry the benefit of an exemption, really does raise an issue of fairness. And it should be discussed. And then finally, the next area that I like to talk about, and I promise I will be quick, If we're sharing the burden equally, just follow this math for me for a little bit. We think anywhere from 45 to 55% of Downers Grove's residents actually attend a worship place on a regular basis. Now, just using my church's experience, because I'm on the finance committee with Mr. Ahmed, who's here behind me, about a third of the people who actively participate in an organization, a place of worship, actually contribute to that organization. So if you have 5,000 members, and half of them come and a third of them contributed, you're getting contributions from 800 or 900 of those people. And those numbers will, I believe, reflect quite frequently across all the churches. You're imposing a duty on a church. That church then turns around and has to make that fiscal responsibility on its members. Those members are the people who choose to worship. And not only the ones who choose to worship, the ones who choose to participate. Thus, that expense, that burden has now fallen on a significantly smaller amount of people. If you eliminate the churches, you give them the exemptions, either bring the Park District back in, i.e., all property owners contribute to the Park District, thus equally sharing the expense across all residents, or if you believe that that is truly a warranted exemption, then apply the amount of money that you're applying to the nonprofits, put that then back against the overall population. The distribution doesn't fall to the 20 or 30% who choose to worship, who choose to participate. That burden then falls across the total community, i.e. shared burden based on usage across the community, which I believe is the goal of this utility. And finally, then I just want to close on just a couple of procedural notes. I'm sure you're all hearing different issues. Somebody applying for a credit, too much hassle, gives up on the credit, amount of money, $300 for an application fee to fight for a credit. Just some thought maybe, or some help in maybe better defining what should be applied for a credit for, significantly reduce the application fees to get them, i.e. you're trying to make a stance in a brand new utility and send a message to the community. The ability to operate effectively underneath that community and understand the expenses would go a long way, maybe waiving the fees for a year. Understanding you have administrative expenses and all that kind of stuff. Just some thoughts about those issues. I think you'll find in your own constituencies, you probably heard already, there are many people who are frustrated with that process. So in essence, Jim Crawford, St. Mary's, first of hopefully many churches to come, and those are the points we'd like to address. Thanks for your time.